Hey Robert, thanks for the videos. We went through each one, the forward and rear facing videos. I have a few things that stuck out. Obviously there's a lot of things you did really well during the race, and so we'll focus on some of the good, some of the bad, but we'll take each section at a time. So we'll start with that first video of the beginning of the race, and I'm going to skip around to some of the timestamp points where I found things that I thought were interesting or things to focus on moving forward for the next event. So let's take a look here. Okay, now the first thing I noticed, and this is very common for a lot of people, especially when they're new to racing, is this Porsche Cup car that you're following. You had a tendency in the beginning of the race to brake at the same time he brakes. So when you come into certain braking zones, he goes to the brakes, he's 100 feet ahead of you, you're going to the brakes at the exact same moment. So I'll stop the video, show you an example here. So coming up into turn 7 at Indy, I stop it when he hits the brakes. Okay, so he hits the brakes, he's about halfway down this curbing on the outside, and unless that Cup car is equipped with ABS, I'm assuming it isn't, there's definitely no way that it should be able to outbrake you in that club sport. So I think your natural braking point is probably somewhere around that same area, but you're probably looking at the back of his car, you see these two taillights pop on, and you hit the brakes at the exact same moment. So you're going to find it very challenging to close this deficit if we keep braking at the same exact position, or sorry, brake at the same time that that car is on the brakes. So make sure that we ignore that. You travel all the way down to your natural braking point before you brake, so hopefully you can start to close this gap under braking. So I noticed that on several laps, especially early in the race when you were really in close quarters with the Porsche, places where you should be able to outbrake that car, we're tending to brake too early, and I think that's the only reason. Again, very common. A lot of video that I watch, especially newer people to the sport, that's a very high tendency to do that. So let's skip ahead a little bit further here. Okay. So the chicane here, this temporary chicane, really slows us down before the fast turn 3, leading onto the long main straightaway. So the speeds that we're driving the car going into turn 3 are much, much lower than if we were just to run straight through there. And right after I start playing this video again, you're going to notice you have a big full lift, and then we come back to throttle. And then I've watched other laps where you have a lot of throttle modulation where you're on and off and on and off and on and off, and I can hear the motor deceleration in the car. That's just a killer for momentum. You'd be much better off, even though I know it's not possible to go through here flat, to just roll up to a position on the throttle where you can sustain it and not have to let go of it. Maybe you can't add any more, but you find somewhere in the range where you can just hang the throttle until you get far enough around turn 3 where you can continue to add the rest, rather than adding too much, having to come back off, then trying again, and then coming back off. Every time we come off, we're getting little bits of motor deceleration that are slowing the car through turn 3, and it's just killing our momentum as we run onto the main straightaway here. And of course, as you know, this is the longest, most common passing area on the track on this configuration. You really need to get a good run out of 3. So you hear a lot of the throttle modulation there. And it was better or worse lap to lap. And on a few of the laps, like I said, I noticed a complete full lift to 0 throttle and then coming back into it. And that would be the worst thing to do in that corner. You want to carry some degree of throttle onto this straightaway without having to let go. So jumping ahead here, 340 on the time. Just one more example of the braking, just to give you another idea here. So this time we're coming up into the fast, wheelie hill going reverse. The brake lights come on in the Cup car. We come to the brakes at the exact same moment. But again, we're positioned quite a bit behind the Cup car now, so now we're over slowing wheelie hill. And that just lets that car get away from us. It's basically driving us around the track right now. We brake when they brake. As soon as those brake lights turn off and he starts to accelerate, then you start to accelerate, and it just forces that gap to stay the same the whole time. Okay. Coming up into the next corner, same thing. Noticed it on the previous laps, but again, he's going to the brakes, we're on the brakes. We're quite a bit back. Let's skip ahead to the front side of the track. This is one of my favorite parts of the track on this configuration. So you do a really good job on the start here on this left-hander. We'll just call it turn 1 past start finish line. What ends up happening though is I think you're adverse to using this apex curb. You tend to shy away from using too much of it. When we do use it, we're trying to run across it too straight. You actually need quite a bit of steering angle here in the car, and we want to use a large amount of this curb. Our right side tire should be all the way up to the tippy top of this, and we're really aiming for the back side of this curb. Let me go just a smidge further. So right here is what I'm aiming for, this area of the curb. The front side doesn't matter so much. I'm really aiming for the back side of it, and I want to use a lot of this curb so that hopefully the angle of the car is pointing this direction more so than off towards that red strand of barrier here. So we're just apexing this too early. We're not using enough of the curb, and it really kind of ruins our run up to the next set of corners. So we just end up going this way too much off that curb. We could have the car pointed more towards the Corvette a lot sooner if we use a later apex and more of that curb. Just get the car aimed earlier, allow us to accelerate down this short straight a lot quicker. And I think that would have helped keep you closer to the Corvette and keep you closer to the Porsche later in the race, because you were much stronger than them through the chicane, I felt, and you're much stronger than them through patience. Especially when I'd watch the rear view camera, you really pulled away from the Corvette coming out of patience. So if we could put this whole sequence together, I think it would have helped you stay ahead of the Corvette a little longer. But you do a really great job here, Robert. This is probably your strongest corner in patience, and you're just that. You're far more patient than the Corvette, far more patient than the Cup car. It was especially noticeable on the rear view camera because you could just see the separation from the Corvette. You would just walk away from him there. So that's probably one of your best turns here on this configuration. Let's skip ahead again. Okay. Now, this is the turn before Wheelie Hill, the long right-hand corner. I know how difficult it is to get to this apex. It's a challenge, and there's a variety of lines that you can take going into this corner. But I'd say by far this was the turn throughout the race where we missed this apex the most. And we missed this apex a lot. I'd say at least 80% of the laps we were off of the apex in this corner. And it just kind of gave us a dull run up into Wheelie Hill. And it seemed like this was a corner where a lot of the other cars like Lofton and the Corvette were able to close time on you because they were able to get to the apex and get the throttle sooner towards Wheelie Hill. So I noticed that you're paddle shifting. I noticed that you select the downshift really late. And I know you're doing it late to salvage momentum, but I think the late downshift could be done a little bit earlier to just help put the car weight-wise more on the nose, maybe help that front tire grab better and turn for the apex. So that's what I would encourage you to do this direction at Indy is go for the downshift sooner, let those those RPMs, the deceleration, pull the front of the car down and turn you in for the apex better. Of course, the other thing to check, Robert, as you go through this corner is make sure your eyes are up here on the actual point where you want to apex the corner and not on the back of the Corvette and not on this outside curbing too long, which is tempting to look at because you want to drive the car out wide before you go back for the apex. But if you focus out here too long, it just gets us behind. So make sure that your eyes are really targeted on the main thing here, and that's the apex. And there's no apex curb. I know how challenging it is to find a reference there. You really have to just be focused in this area over here. But we missed this one a lot, and I feel like we lost time to the Corvette and the Cup car here just from that. You see how wide we are here? We really need that run. up into that corner. The line here also going into Wheelie Hill, I felt like we were a little bit too narrow. We could stay out wider. You can see we're already on the inside of that seam. I think the car needs to be out here on the right side, or driver's right of the seam, on the way at least over the top of the hill, and then pull the car down to the apex where the sealer is at the bottom of the hill. This curbing isn't so important to apex going this direction. It's really only important going the other direction. I think even the Cup car in front of you, the Corvette in front of you, everybody who seemed like they're making a big effort to get to this curb, and I don't think that helps you any. I think you really just want to focus on getting to the sealer at the very, very bottom. This downshift as well, you hear that downshift right at the bottom of the hill. I think that's a symptom of being too tight. You're too tight all the way down the hill. You have a lot of steering angle in the car most likely, and that's difficult to tell because I can't see what your hands are doing from this perspective. But the really tight line here, I think, forces you to really slow the car down, which forces you to have to make a downshift, which also ruins a lot of momentum. Having to grab second gear is what it sounds like you're grabbing at the bottom. When I think if we took a wider, more open line through this corner, use the downhill to help keep the momentum up, and then leave the car in third gear and let that carry us onto the straightaway, I think that combination would be much faster. And I actually timestamped, there was a lap later in the race, we'll get to it in a little bit, where you were much better on this corner and you actually did some of those things that I'm talking about. You were wider, you carried third gear, you got to the later apex, and to me that lap looked like the quickest one of all the races, of all the race laps. The corner before Wheelie Hill is the one that was our nemesis, of course, throughout the event. We missed the apex quite a lot. However, there was one lap that was really, really solid. It was about the 14-minute, 30-second mark in your middle video where you nailed it. And if we could just continue to drive the corner like this, I think that we would be in really good shape through the race. You know, collectively, every time we miss that apex, we're probably giving up a half a second or so. Just imagine if we could have a half second a lap back by hitting that apex every single time. So here we are, we're coming into that corner now. You downshift earlier than you normally do, down to the apex. You get a great run out of there. So that's the way I would love to see you drive that corner lap in and lap out. I think that earlier downshift really just, it's the difference maker between giving the car enough front grip to turn and not having that grip that just pushes you 5-6 car width wide miss of the apex. So just something for you to keep note of. That was a really good lap, really good run through that corner. So let's see if we can do that more repetitively next time out. Getting more into this middle video, we get to about the 16-minute mark, and I started noticing we started missing apex curbs and missing our apex more and more often. Now I've ridden mountain bikes with you, so I know firsthand that you're not physically fatiguing, but I do think that we get to a point during this event where we start to mentally fatigue, and we've kind of lost touch with the front runners. The Corvette's getting away from us, the Cup car's quite a ways ahead, and maybe it's a little bit of boredom and a little mental fatigue, but we start to miss our marks. So I run through this section with you just to show you a few things that we miss here. We're wide of this apex a little. Coming into patience, we start to brake earlier and earlier. We're starting to give the car a little maintenance throttle inputs through patience that you normally don't do. We're a little wide of the apex there too. Get really wide over here, missing that apex. A little wide of that one as well. It just seems like this lap our focus just got a little out of sync. And I know that how that can feel toward the end of a race where you kind of lost touch with the guys you're fighting with, and it's hard to keep your intensity levels up. But it just costs you more and more time, and you don't want to give up on a race this early. You know, just because we're losing touch with those guys, a full course caution could come out at any time. Those guys get caught in traffic at any time, and we've got to keep pushing and maintaining our pace so that if we do get an opportunity later on, that we can take full advantage of that. So that brings us to the end of this middle video. We'll jump to the last video here in just a moment, so we'll be right back. Okay, Robert, so we're into the final video now. Just skipping ahead here to about 30 seconds or so in. Just wanted to show you another really good run through this section of the track. So this was Wheelie Hill that I wanted to focus on, and this is the moment I talked about earlier in the video where we would come back to this corner and show you a lap where you really nailed it. And I thought this was one of your best runs through Wheelie Hill. You stay out wider, you leave the car in third gear, I believe it's third, you don't make the extra downshift at the bottom of the hill, and I just feel overall you carried the most momentum on this lap. So as we come down the hill, you can see on previous laps we were over on driver's left of this seam, and so you're over on the right hand side coming down the other side. You're not focused on this curb at all, which is good. Eyes should be really glued at the sealer at the bottom. That's our true apex here for this corner. There's no downshift. You're tight to your apex. Good run to the exit. So I would love to see that more often. As you come down Wheelie Hill, I think that was, you nailed it. Looked really good through there. Okay, 122, we'll jump ahead here. Now, as the laps went on, I was paying closer and closer attention to your braking points at the end of the straightaway. And what I noticed is as the race went along, you started braking earlier and earlier and earlier. So at the beginning of the race, I'm going to pause it right here. So this is where you start to brake here at the end. At the beginning of the race, you're up here at these 5 cones. This is where you were braking earlier in the race. And you can see how much earlier now we're braking at this stage in the race. And this could just be a fatigue thing. It could be that the tires are starting to feel a little bit greasy. They don't feel like they have the grip they had at the beginning. But on this straightaway, no matter what the tires are doing in the corner, I want to still get to the same brake marker. And if it feels like the car is getting greasier in the corner, I'll maybe add more brake pressure initially when I reach that marker as the event goes on. Maybe I'm braking at an 8 out of 10 at the beginning of the race and getting into the corner just fine, and towards the end I have to brake at a full 10 out of 10 just to make up the difference in the lack of grip. But we don't want to brake earlier. You know, that's like a worst case, last resort sort of thing. If we just can't get to the car to the apex at all, then I might start to brake earlier. But we should be able to stay at this marker the entire race and take advantage of this full throttle time all the way up to that cone, and instead of giving it up sooner and sooner and sooner and shortening our full throttle time on the straightaway. Again, it's not costing you a lot in this example. Those cars ahead of us are quite a ways ahead now. It's not like we're about to set up an overtake, but you could be in a situation where you are trying to catch somebody, and this could cost you that little bit of time you need towards the end of an event. So definitely stay more consistent with this braking marker and just add more pressure as the race goes on if you need it, just to get down to the apex. But I noticed that just kind of got inconsistent towards the end and earlier also. We're going to come back to that same braking zone, but again, this is even later now. I'm going to show you how much sooner we're on the brakes this time. This is about 2 or 3 laps later. Right about there, and now we're on the brakes. Just a smidge earlier than the last time we came here and looked. So it varies too much. Now the other thing that's going to happen is if you keep changing where you brake for this corner, you keep having to anticipate and be on guard for what the car might do for you up at the apex, or do to you. I mean, if you brake at the same marker every single lap, the car is going to be very predictable. You're going to know exactly what to expect from its behavior as you get down to the apex. But if we brake earlier and earlier and earlier, it becomes harder and harder to predict what the car is going to do at the apex. Either that, or it's going to make the car, it's almost too conservative, and we have to start going to a maintenance throttle too soon just to work our way around this corner to the start finish line. So again, we're beating a horse here, but just make sure we stay consistent on that reference. Let's jump back just a little bit. So this is the, it's turn 1 and 2 on the proper direction at Indy, but going reverse track here, it looks like we leave the car, and it sounds like second gear to me, just too long. And this is along the same lines that we talked about in turn 3 coming onto the straightaway, where we could pause and hold the throttle without letting go of the throttle and suffering from motor deceleration. We're getting a lot of that here too. So you can hear the car in that high rev range and just I think every one of those little modulations is costing us momentum. So every time we have to pull back on the throttle, you can hear the engine surge and just pulls our speed down. Then you try to pick back up and then let go, and it pulls our speed down again. I think the car would benefit from a short shift up there. Just getting the car up into third gear, at least that'll let the car, roll faster through turn 1 and 2, and ultimately down here to the start finish line. And it's a little bit easier to modulate the throttle if you went 1 gear up. So that would be my advice there, and it just became more evident towards the end of the race. And this could tie into your braking earlier and earlier at the end of the straightaway is causing you to have to stay in that maintenance throttle range in second gear longer and longer and longer. So it just became more evident as the race went along. So if that happens during the next event, grab the next gear. You don't really need to stay that high in the rev range for that long of a period. It's not benefiting you to stay there. So a little short shift, I think, would give us more momentum onto the start finish line. And again, that corner is so important because it's going to finish this lap and it starts our next lap. So any little bit of time we can pick up in turns 1 and 2, that'll carry through onto our next lap as far as our lap time is concerned. Okay, we'll speed ahead here. 5:18. Again, we're getting to the very, very end of the race now. And we're just a little bit of fatigue setting in here also. Not to harp on it too much, but you're gonna have to kind of do something, in the car. You can hear as we came to the exit of the corner here, we are approaching this exit a little too early, mostly because we're apexing too early through this chicane. Let's go back. We're really early on this apex, and you're angled towards the sand trap. And you'll hear, anytime you get to the exit of a corner and you hear a throttle lift, that's a big red flag that you turned in too early. So we get to our exit, and you hear that throttle lift. Because you were going to run out of track if you didn't. So anytime you have to give the throttle up on the exit, it's just too early. And I think this is just a little fatigue. We were early apexing that corner, almost the entire race, but it got to a point there where we really had to give up the exit in order to stay on track. And then we get pretty wide here, and this was normally a really good corner for you. Through the majority of the race, we didn't miss the apex here. But again, a little bit of mental fatigue, and part of that's just there's not a lot going on. You're kind of stuck out there by yourself. You've lost touch with the group in front of you. You pulled away from Lenny Lofton. Watched that on the rear view camera. So it's easy to just get a little lackadaisical, lose your focus just a little bit. Just try to stay tight. Okay, so what we're going to do next, we're going to jump to one of the rear view cameras, and I want to go back to the beginning of the race, and we're going to talk about the Corvette overtaking you at the end of the straightaway. So we'll be right back with you. All right, Robert, so we're back to the start of the race. And so it was really the only overtake during the race where you were overtaken by the Corvette. So not a lot of passing going on, but just to talk a little bit about racecraft and what's allowed and what's proper etiquette when it comes to being defensive. We just wanted to take a look at this. And of course, this is a club race. And you know, it depends on how serious you want to be or how aggressive you want to be with your fellow competitors at Indy. But in my experience, we'll take a look at this scenario and I'd tell you how I would do it. So there's clearly a horsepower advantage for the Corvette coming onto the main straightaway. But in the laps leading up to this, you were strong enough out of this temporary chicane where you would have enough of a gap that he wasn't able to catch you in time to get to the brakes and possibly overtake at the end. However, on this particular lap, he was able to stay close enough. And so if I'm looking in the rear view camera after the chicane and I notice, okay, he was able to hang with me through there, normally I'm quicker, I'm already starting to think about what I'm going to do defensively. So as you guys come on to the main straightaway, you see you dropped a little bit of your right rear wheel in the dirt there too, so which probably didn't help you any, giving you kind of a bad run onto the straightaway. So all those things combined, knowing that maybe I dropped the wheel off the track, I didn't get quite enough of a run out of the chicane, I should be anticipating an overtake this lap. So you can see him closing, and we're only about halfway down the straightaway. Now, you have a right to be defensive, but the rule is that you've got to make the move first. So if you're going to be defensive, you've got to go over and take the inside line away before the Corvette makes that decision. So once the Corvette pulls to the left, you can't pull to the left in response and block him. But right now, before he really makes the move, I would have been like, okay, I got to take the inside line. He's catching me, he's going to catch me before the brake zone. I would move over, and it's not like you have to move all the way over to the white line on the clear inside of the straightaway, nothing that aggressive, but if you moved over just to the center lane, that would be discouraging enough to probably keep him behind you on this lap. Then hopefully on the next lap you can get a good enough run through that chicane where he can't close on you again. But we stayed on the racing line, and you did the polite thing, the gentlemanly thing, and you let him have the inside line here. So it was pretty easy for him to take the position. Now, you're allowed one defensive move in between every corner. So basically you could pull to the inside and drive down that center lane, going down the main straightaway. You could get around turns 1 and 2, and as you came down the next straightaway across start finish line, if he went to pull out again, or if you thought he was close enough to pull out, you could take the inside away from him in that section as well. You can do that in between every turn. You have that one move at your disposal. So you could hold that Corvette off for quite a long time if you just keep taking the inside line away from him. Now it's a double-edged sword, because the more you take that defensive line and the more you take the inside and you take the tighter line around the track, it's going to slow you down. It's going to slow him down. It's going to let the cup car get farther away from you. But at least you can hold the position for at least a little while. So those are some of the things that stood out to me, Robert. In the future, what would be helpful if you were going to submit another video is if we could position that forward-facing camera in a way that we could see your hands. We can see your helmet. So something back here facing out the windshield. So you get a perspective of what you're doing with the steering wheel. I think that would have helped me a little bit in diagnosing what you're doing in that right-hand corner before Wheelie Hill. Because we missed it so often, and I couldn't really tell if that was something we were doing with your steering in addition to maybe the downshift being too late and some other things. So that would be helpful going forward. But I think you had some really good turns. Obviously, patience, you did a great job. Turn 7, you did a great job. I felt like you were really good through the chicane there on most laps, and you had a good run through turn 3 on most laps. There's some corners that we touched on that need to be polished up, and places where we could be a little more aggressive. But all in all, I thought you did a good job just on your driving. Yeah, looking forward to doing some more of this, Robert, and hopefully we can get out to the actual track here soon too. So thanks for the video. Talk to you soon, man.